Hello, and welcome back to Prime Sport Parenting 505. If you recall in class number 1, I introduced you to the impact that you as parents have on your child's athletic experience. I also shared with you my 3 pillars of successful achievers: self-esteem, ownership, and emotional mastery. And I suggested to you that these 3 attributes act as the foundation for the development of your child, not only as an athlete, but also as a person. Well, today I'm going to explore in class number 2, 5 attitudes for athletic success. And so let's get right to it, the screen share. Attitude, the attitudes that your kids have about their athletic experiences, about themselves as an athlete, acts as the foundation of athletic success. In fact, the attitudes that your children have about their sports will actually make or break their experiences. They will dictate whether their experiences are positive, healthy, and successful, or negative, unhealthy, and ultimately unsuccessful. Now, the fact is, though, is that you have the most influence on your children's attitudes. You can largely determine how they look at their sport and how they look at themselves as athletes in 3 ways primarily. First of all, the words you use with them. Do you use words like results and victory and success and failure? Or do you talk about effort and attitude and responsibility and confidence and so on? Also, your emotions. As I talked about in class number 1, so much of the way your kids react emotionally to their sports experience is dictated by your emotional experiences. If you respond in a healthy and positive way emotionally, then they are more likely to as well. Finally, with your actions, your involvement in their sport, how much ownership you take, what you do for them, do you micromanage, do you give them the freedom to own their own sport? So I can't emphasize enough the role that you play in laying this foundation of athletic success in establishing certain attitudes. Your goal as a parent of a young athlete is to, if they're present, remove any of the unhealthy attitudes that are present in your children and instill healthy attitudes. Those, again, will act as that foundation for a positive and healthy athletic experience. During the course of this class, number 2, I'm going to introduce you to 5 attitudes can make a difference. Attitudes that, if they go down the bad road, will be unhealthy, or if you can help them, your kids develop these and go down the good road, they will be incredibly life and sport and personal affirming. The first attitude is life or death. That is, does your child perceive participating in their sport, competing, as a life or death situation? Now, you might often wonder, how is that possible? And yet, if you think about it, if your child responds with anxiety, with very strong negative emotions, either before a competition or after, that tells you that they are seeing the situation as probably more important than it needs to be, as life or death. Because in a way, every time your athletes go to compete, they're putting their quote-unquote life on the line. Now, when I talk about this life, I don't mean physical life or death. Yes, of course, on very rare occasions, athletes die in their sport. But for the most part, again, it's pretty rare. The kind of death I'm talking about, the kind of life and death I'm talking about, is their self-identity life, their self-esteem life, their goals life. So in terms of their self-identity, if they're very serious about their sport, they probably see themselves as an athlete. So when they go to perform, they're putting that identity on the line. Will they survive as they perceive themselves as an athlete? Also, their self-esteem, which I discussed last class. Their view of themselves, do they see themselves as competent and capable and in control of their athletic lives? They're putting that on the line when they perform. Finally, their goals. Every time they perform, in a way, they're putting their goals on the line in little ways. So if your kids succeed, well, they live again to continue their goals. If they fail, well, then they might question whether those goals are achievable. The fact is, their athletic survival, again, this is not physical life or death, their survival requires consistent success, because to survive as an athlete, which means progressing up the competitive ladder, they need to have success on a regular basis. So I see so many kids, they approach a competition and it is as if they're putting this non-physical, this psychological and emotional, their life on the line. And that produces a reaction that often will actually interfere with them achieving their goals. You want your children to see their sports participation as about life, not in a threatening life way, but in a life-affirming way. Because the reality is, even if your children don't achieve their goals, and maybe they have very high goals like playing professionally or performing in the Olympics, which again, as I talked about in the first class, is really statistically unlikely. Will they be disappointed? Of course they will. You want them to be disappointed because it means they care about their sport. But will they survive? Absolutely. But again, kids without a lot of perspective, a lot of experience in life, they can get so invested in their sport that they think in some ways they won't survive. One of the great realizations that your kids need to have is that no matter what happens to them in their sport, they will be okay. You will still love them. Their friends will still like them. They still can be successful in other aspects of their life. What's so important here is that if athletes can really ingrain this attitude of life, not life or death, if they can accept this attitude very deep down, it will free them to perform their best. Because when they go to perform, it will not be a life or death situation. It will not be threatening. It will not be scary for them. Because it's life affirming, because their focus is on how sports enhance their life, they want to pursue it with gusto and confidence and absolute abandon. First exercises for these 5 attitudes. Does your child view sports as life or death? If so, why? The chances are that attitude of my sport, when I participate, I'm putting my life on the line, chances are it's coming from you. Can it sometimes come from a coach or other person? Yes, but most often from the parents. Second, what messages are you sending about sports being life or death? And then if you recognize that maybe you are sending some unhealthy messages about life or death in sports, what do you need to change? Because again, you have that power. So if you want to do the exercises now, stop the video, complete the exercises in the workbook, and restart the video. If you want to do it after class, that's fine too. Second attitude is process or focus. So many kids these days have an outcome focus because we live in a culture that lives and dies on results. So kids are constantly talking about and focusing on winning, results, rankings, other competitors, who they're beating, who's beating them. And a lot of people, parents, coaches, and kids think that by focusing on the outcome, they're more likely to get that outcome that they want. But in fact, it's just the opposite. Having that outcome focus actually reduces the chances of your athletes achieving the result they want for a couple of reasons. First of all, when does the outcome of a competition occur? Well, it occurs at the end, after the game, after they cross the finish line. If your kids are focusing at the end, what are they not focusing on? Well, what they need to do to perform their best. Also, when kids get nervous, when they experience pre-competitive anxiety, what is that anxiety coming from? Is it the process or the outcome? Well, they're worried about the outcome. Most often, they're worried about failure. So I would love it if kids could never think about results, never worry about or focus on results. And especially, it would be great if you as parents and the coaches also didn't. But let's be realistic. Results matter. Your kids don't get ahead because they're good kids. They don't get ahead because they work hard, although of course hard work is important. They get ahead because they produce the results. But in order to get results, oddly enough, the thing to do is not focus on those results. Because your kids are competitive. They're in a competitive sport. They're in a competitive culture. I don't expect that your kids will not think about results. And you can't just tell them, don't think about results, don't think about results. The more you tell them to not think about results, they will think about results. At the same time, again, you send your kids very important messages. If you don't talk about results, they're less likely to talk about results, and they're less likely to have an outcome focus, which, as I just described, will actually prevent them from getting the results they want. Where you want to go is a process focus. And a process focus involves having your kids focus on what they need to do to perform their best. That's all. It might be technical, it might be tactical, it might be the overall performance, but always focusing on what they can do to perform their best. This process focus does a couple things. First of all, it ensures that your kids do everything they need to do to be totally prepared to get the outcome they want, because they're focusing on what they need to do to perform their best. Great thing about process is it's entirely within their control. The fact is, your kids can't always control the outcomes. They might have a great performance, they might do everything they can, but they're still beaten, or they're still down in the rankings of the race. But they can control the process. And the paradox here is that if they focus on the process, they're more likely to perform well. And if they perform well, what's the likely outcome? Well, the very outcome that they wanted in the first place. Focusing on the process, especially before a competition, instead of creating that pre-competitive anxiety, builds confidence, because they know they can do the process. They know that they can do what's necessary to perform their best. Now, does that guarantee success in every competition? Of course not, because in most sports, young athletes can't control everything that impacts performance, whether it's other competitors, field, course, court or hill conditions, or the weather. But it will give them confidence, and that will increase their chances of performing well. Plus, because they're focusing on that which is controllable and that which builds their confidence, it reduces doubt, worry, and anxiety. Let's talk about a pink elephant. Like I said earlier, it's very difficult to get your kids to not think about results. Like if I tell you, don't think about a pink elephant, what do you think about? Well, of course, the pink elephant. But if I say, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant, does that stop you from thinking about the pink elephant? No, even more so, it puts the pink elephant in your head. So with your kids, if they start talking about results, don't tell them not to think about results. Just like the pink elephant, they'll think about results. Instead, allow them to acknowledge that they're outcome focused. Allow them to acknowledge that they want this result. Then immediately switch to the blue hippo. So if I say, I want you to think about a blue hippo, what do you think about? Well, a blue hippo. And what did you not think about? Well, the pink elephant. So by focusing on one thing, that is the blue hippo, or in this case, the process, it prevents them and it shifts them away from thinking about the pink elephant or the outcome. And one way to do that, one way to get them to think about the blue hippo, about the process, is simply to ask them, what do you need to do now to be as prepared as you can be to perform your best? So anytime you hear them talking results, think pink elephant, acknowledge it, and shift them to that blue hippo, to the process. Exercises for process versus outcome. Does your child focus on the process or the outcome? If the outcome, why? Kids don't just think about results. They get the message that they should think about results from somewhere else. Yes, of course, they will get some of that from their peers, from their teammates, from our culture, from their friends. What do most friends or family say after a competition? Did you win? You don't want that to happen, but you can't control that. What you can do, though, is control the message. So I want you to ask yourself, what messages are you sending about the process or the outcome? Are you sending messages to them that encourage them to focus on results or on what they need to do to perform their best? If you find that you are sending messages about results, what do you need to do to change it? And what you need to do to change it is change what you say to them in terms of the focus of either results or process. Third attitude, success or failure. So many kids these days are so focused on failure. In fact, fear of failure is epidemic among young athletes. It's epidemic in our youth achievement culture. one of the top 3 reasons parents bring their kids to me is because of a fear of failure. But here's the thing, is failure worth fearing? Well, I'm going to suggest not. In fact, failure is absolutely essential for success. And the most successful people, not only most successful athletes, but the most successful people in all walks of life, failed frequently and monumentally on the way to success. So failure in and of itself isn't a bad thing. What creates fear of failure is not failure itself, but the consequences that athletes associate with that failure. And there's been a ton of great research on fear of failure. And what they found, the most common consequences, bad consequences that young athletes attribute to failure is my parents won't love me, my friends won't like me, I won't achieve my goals, it will have all been a waste of time and energy, I'll never be successful at anything in my life. Now, if you think about those perceptions, those attitudes, well, yeah, I can see why kids would be pretty darned afraid of failure. So what happens is that because of these bad consequences that young athletes attribute to failure, they see failure as this really awful thing that they need to get away from. It's like this mountain lion. And if a mountain lion is chasing you, what are you going to do? You're going to run away from it as fast as possible, because if it catches you, what's it going to do? It's going to eat you and kill you. But what I try to emphasize to young athletes is that failure is not a mountain lion. It's actually a kitty cat. Now, can a kitty cat hurt you? Sure it can. It can bite you and scratch you. But will it kill you? Absolutely not. Same thing with failure. Failure hurts. It feels really bad to fail, but it will not kill your kids. In fact, it will help them become more successful. Let's explore fear of failure a little longer. 3 ways to avoid failure. Because again, if failure is this mountain lion, your kids are going to do everything they can to stay away from that mountain lion. The first way young athletes avoid failure is simply to quit. Your kids can't lose, they can't fail if they don't get in the game, if they don't take the shot. And that's why you do see a lot of kids dropping out of youth sports, because they're so afraid to fail that they're not even willing to get in there and take the chance of it. The second one is, and we're going to get a little bit deep psychological here, it's called self-defeating behavior or self-sabotage. This is where kids actually do things to ensure failure. Where, for example, they won't prepare their equipment, they won't give their best effort, they'll feign an injury, they'll feign being sick. So this guarantees failure. But this self-sabotage gives them an excuse. Well, I would have won if I hadn't been sick, or I would have done well if my equipment hadn't been broken. And that excuse protects them. It protects their self-esteem, it protects their self-identity. It protects them from having to admit that they're not going to achieve their goals. But of course, the unfortunate thing about self-defeating behavior is that they still fail. And on results sheets, there is no excuse line. It's just, there's the result, you didn't succeed. The third way is what I call kids stay in a safety zone. So think of a continuum where failure is on my left and success is on my right. One way to get away from failure and avoid that fear of failure is to get as far away from failure as possible. So kids with a fear of failure often get in what I call a safety zone, where they're far from failure. They are maybe top 15, or they've got a winning record. And so nobody's going to accuse them of being failures. But they know they can be really successful on the podium, winning record, victories, and so on. But here's the problem. The nice thing about this safety zone is they don't have to worry about failing, because kids with a fear of failure are not really concerned about pursuing success. It is, as I suggested, all about avoiding failure. And in order to really pursue success, athletes need to take risks. So in order to be successful, kids absolutely need to take risks. The problem is with risks, by their very nature, is they don't always work out. And if you have a child who is more concerned about avoiding failure than they are about pursuing success, those risks are going to weigh very heavily. And so they are not going to take those risks. They're going to stay nice and safe. But of course, without those risks, they're not going to be truly successful. So you want to look at, do your kids act in these ways to avoid failure? So I was struck by this contradiction of kids with a fear of failure actually doing things that guaranteed failure. And I came to this realization that kids with a fear of failure don't actually fear failure. They fear total failure. So how do I define total failure? It's your kids giving it everything they've got and not achieving their goals. So is total failure a good or a bad thing? Well, I've asked this of thousands upon thousands of young athletes. And almost to the person, 99.9% of them say, not only is total failure a bad thing, it is the worst possible thing. Why? What does a young athlete have to admit if they experience total failure, if they give it everything they've got and they don't achieve their goals? They have to admit that they're just not good enough. And no young athlete wants to admit that. But what I would suggest is that total failure may not be the goal, but it's a goal. Let me explain a little bit. So again, children say that total failure is the worst thing because they're just not good enough. And I say that total failure is actually kind of a good thing. Because here's my definition of total success. Your kid's giving it everything they've got and achieving their goals. Good or bad thing? Well, it's a great thing. It's not a trick question. Total success is awesome. Give their best effort, achieve their goals. What do total success and total failure have in common? It means they did everything they could. It means they gave everything possible to achieve their goals. And ultimately, that's all kids can do. They, of course, can't always find success. Not every kid's going to be on the top of the podium at the Olympics or sign a professional contract or have that kind of great athletic success. But if they give it everything they've got, they're going to experience some form of success. Why? Because they give it everything they've got. And even if they don't reach the pinnacle, yes, of course, there'll be some disappointment, but they will feel that it is still a good experience. They will be able to still look back on their athletic experience and feel like they had success and it was all worth it. So you want to help instill in your kids two aspects of this. One attitude is that failure is okay. It's not desirable, it's not great, but it's part of the deal. And it's not the failure, it's how they respond to the failure that matters. Second of all, help them define success, not in terms of results, but in terms of some other more controllable qualities, such as we've talked about, giving their best effort. Because again, if they give their best effort, they will find some success. Going all out. The athletes I work with, I tell them every time they perform, I want them to go out there and just throw themselves at it. Bring it, attack, charge, go for it. Whatever phrase they use, I want them to leave it all out there. By doing that, they're able to perform as well as they can. Maybe not absolutely best as possible, but they will perform well if they give their best effort, if they're going all out. Success is also about having fun, because I've worked with a lot of really successful young athletes who were really unhappy, who hated it. And the best thing they could do, a success for them, was to quit. So I'm always looking at ways to bring fun back into it, because if it's fun, that is a success in and of itself. Also, you want to see your young athletes improving. You want them making progress, because kids develop at different stages and at different speeds. Some kids are super successful really young, but are off the charts when they get older. Others are slow to develop initially and go on to stardom. The key thing is to focus on progress and improvement. And a great way to gauge that is have your kids identify their goals. What do they want to achieve long-term, this year, this season, etc.? and have them chart the progress, see them improving technically, tactically, physically, mentally, and in terms of their results. That is very motivating, and that is a success. Lastly, as I said before, you can't deny it, results matter. So yes, of course, you want to see your kids getting results that they want, that again shows progress toward their goals. But you don't want to have them focus on it. That's the last piece, that's the result, the outcome of doing all those other things. And if they're able to accomplish all these other definitions of success, they will find the results they want and find the objective success. Some exercises for success and failure. Does your child focus on success or failure? If your child does focus on failure, why? What is causing your child to have that focus on the bad stuff, on the mountain lion? Second, what messages are you sending about success and failure? Are you sending ones about healthy attitudes about success and failure, or is the focus, again, on failure? And if you see that you're sending some unhealthy messages about success and failure, what do you need to change? How can you shift that message, which will then help shift that attitude in your child? Fourth attitude, goals or expectations. This is one of my favorite areas because it has such a huge impact on how your kids perform on any given day in a competition. Let's start with expectations. What is an expectation? I see it as a strong belief that something will happen, that I expect it to happen. And if you expect it to happen, then if it does, well, it's not a big deal. You just fulfill the expectation. But if you don't, that can be a very bad thing. There is with expectations a feeling of certainty. Let me use an example of a birthday party, birthday present. Let's say your birthday's coming up. Let's say you're 10 years old and your birthday's coming up in a couple of months. And you tell your parents that you want a particular present really bad. You want it so bad. And you tell them and you remind them. And over those next couple of months before your birthday, you just assume, you expect to get that present. So in your mind, you're playing with it. You're having a great time with it. You're enjoying it. In your mind, psychologically and emotionally, you already have it. Your birthday arrives. At your birthday party, open up the presents. That present isn't there. How do you feel? Disappointed? I'm going to say devastated. But why do you feel devastated? Because you didn't get the present? No. It's because psychologically and emotionally, you already had the present and your parents ripped it out of your hands. That is where that pain comes from. And that's the danger of expectation on the day of a competition. Another thing about expectations is that they're all or nothing. You either succeed and meet the expectation, small area there, or you fail and you don't. So there's this very small area of success and this whole big area below it for failure. So there's not a lot of room for error with expectations. Let's also look at the emotional reactions that young athletes have toward expectations. Before a competition, well, expectations create fear and pressure to achieve them. I have to achieve this expectations. I have to meet these expectations. That creates pressure and fear, and that typically doesn't result in great performances. After performance, if by some chance with those expectations, your child succeeds, what's the emotional reaction? Well, it's not excitement and joy, it's relief. Why? Because they dodged the bullet of failure. And that's a really sad thing for me because after your kids succeed, they should be unbelievably excited and thrilled. And relief is the best they can muster? That's not a good thing. And then if they fail to meet that expectation, what's the reaction? Well, it's not just disappointment, it's devastating because it goes back to that life or death, putting their everything on the line and not achieving their goals. And that can result in despair. And that's where kids lose their motivation. That's where they quit. There are 6 phrases. If you hear your kids using them, that indicates that they have expectations. I have to, I need to, I must, I should, I better, I gotta. With these 6 phrases, following them, there's always a comma and a but, and there is an implicit threat. I have to, or this bad thing will happen. I need to, or something bad's gonna happen. I must, or this bad thing's gonna happen. So have your radar on for the words your kids are using about what they're looking forward to in an upcoming competition. If you hear these 6 phrases, red flag, they have expectations that are probably gonna hurt them and prevent them from achieving their goals. You want your kids to always think in terms of goals, not expectations. What are outcome goals? It's something that that your athletes want to achieve. Usually in terms of a result, a victory, a top 10, a podium, whatever it might be. Outcome goals have a very different feeling to them. Whereas expectations have that sense of certainty, with goals, it's about possibility. Like, I'm setting this goal and I may be able to achieve this goal. I'm gonna work toward this goal. So it's possible. So it's not that birthday present thing where it's yanked away. Of course, goals aren't always achieved, in which case, yes, there'll be some disappointment, but only because they didn't realize that possibility. But there won't be that devastation because it was quote unquote expected. Another great thing about goals is, unlike expectations where it's all or nothing, goals are about degree of attainment. Setting goals is an inexact science. There's no way to absolutely precisely determine the right goals. But what matters is the degree of attainment, the amount of improvement toward the goal. So let's compare expectations and goals here. Let's say your child is finishing in the top 20 in their sport, let's say running race, and they set an expectation of top 10, or they set a goal of a top 10, and they finish the race and they finish 12th. With that expectation, did they succeed or fail? Well, they failed because they didn't get into the top 10. But if it was a goal, they succeeded because they improved. Even though they didn't meet the goal of top 10, they improved from 18th to 12th. That's a big improvement, and that's a success. Unlike the emotional reactions related to expectations, very different set related to goals. Before, with goals, there's a sense of excitement and being inspired about going after that goal. After achieving the goal, how do they feel? They feel elated, proud, even more inspired, excited, exhilarated, the kind of emotions they should feel when they've had success. If they don't achieve the goal, as I touched on earlier, sure, they're disappointed because they didn't achieve the goal, but that disappointment doesn't suck the life and the joy out of it. It actually causes them to be more determined. They want it even more next time, so they'll work even harder. Phrases associated with goals, very different from the 6 phrases related to expectations. I want to, I would like to, I'm aiming for, I'm working hard to. Those carry very different emotional and motivational resonance than those 6 phrases: I must, I have to, I need to, I better, I gotta, I should. But even with outcome goals, like I talked about earlier about process versus outcome, sure, acknowledge those outcome goals, but then immediately shift to process goals. Because whether they're goals or expectations, if they're related to results, your kids don't have absolute control over them. In which case, you want to get them to shift to process goals. What do I need to do to perform my best? And if they do that, they're likely to perform the best and therefore achieve the outcome goals. Exercises for goals versus expectations. Do you or your child have goals or expectations? And by the way, this is not just about your child's goals and expectations, but the ones you hold. If you have expectations, she must, he needs to, he should. That places that pressure on them as well. If you or your child have expectations instead of goals, why? Also, what messages might you be sending about goals and expectations? Are you using those 6 phrases? Or is your child using those 6 phrases? Or are you communicating this idea about having goals and striving toward them? If you're on the unhealthy side with expectations, what do you need to do to change, to send a different message? Last attitude is challenge or threat. If I could boil down to a simple distinction, what separates athletes who are successful, who achieve their goals, from those who don't, it's this simple distinction of, do they perceive the situation as a challenge or a threat? Let's look at threat first of all. What's the threat for young athletes? Well, it's failure. And it's a very large threat for many of them, as I tied in earlier with fear of failure. That threat produces a very clear physical reaction: anxiety, muscle tension, and just overall discomfort. And these are physical states that are not conducive to ideal performance, which will lead to success. This threat reaction also produces an unhealthy set of thinking or thoughts. Thinking is negative, doubting, and helpless. Like, I can't do this, and I'm going to get beat, and there's nothing I can do here to achieve my goals. Again, self-defeating pretty much guarantees failure. The threat reaction also causes a series of negative emotions: fear, anger, frustration, despair. Again, none of these emotions will result in successful performance. This threat reaction also causes your young athletes to focus on results, most particularly failure. And as we talked about, if your kids are focusing on results, they're not focusing on the process. The goal then for somebody who feels threatened, to run away, just like that mountain lion. They want to avoid failure at all costs. And the 3 ways, as I talked about, to avoid failure, none of them are ultimately in your child's best interest. The reaction is flight. When your child is threatened in a competitive situation, they want to run away. Now, I'm not saying that they run away off the field, but it causes them to perform cautiously and tentatively and safely. And none of those 3 aspects of performance are going to result in success. You want your child to view their performances as challenges to be pursued, not threats to be avoided. What's the challenge? Well, to pursue excellence, to push themselves, to achieve their goals, to perform the very best they can. Gosh, when I even say those things, I get fired up. I want to go after them. What happens to your young athletes physically when they're challenged by something? Well, they have this interesting mix of being relaxed but also energized. They're kind of fired up. What kind of thoughts they have? Positive. I can do this. I'm going after it. I'm going to do the best I can. Motivated. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to fight no matter what. Emotions? Well, all good ones. Pride, inspiration, excitement, joy, happiness. And as we look through these, physical, thinking, emotions, all of these are necessary to achieve success. And what do athletes who perceive a situation as a challenge focus on? Well, they focus on the process and on the present. That is, what do I need to do to perform my best now? That too is more likely to lead to success. What's the goal for somebody who's challenged? Well, to pursue the goal, to pursue success and achieve success. All about going forward at that thing instead of, for the threat, running away from it. What's the reaction? Bring it on, baby, bring it on. Your young athletes, when they're challenged, they just want to go at it and throw themselves into it. And that, this entire combination of attributes associated with challenge are much more likely to result in a successful performance. Exercises for threat versus challenge. Does your child experience their sport as a threat or a challenge? If it's a threat, why? What is causing them to perceive it as a threat? Second, what messages are you sending about their sport being a challenge or a threat? Are you sending messages of go out there and go get it, or you better do well or else? That's the threat. If you're sending unhealthy messages related to threat, what do you need to change? So, the class number 2 challenge. Commit to instilling these healthy attitudes in your children. Have your radar on, get a sense of whether they have unhealthy attitudes or healthy ones, and look for ways to send the message to them about these very healthy 5 attitudes. And examine each of these 5 attitudes. Look at them, and again, where your kids are and where you are with them, because you can also have these same attitudes. And if you're communicating unhealthy attitudes, change the attitude messages you're sending to your kids. What a gift you give your kids when you communicate to them these healthy attitudes that act as the foundation for their athletic success. Thanks so much. Great second class. We'll see you next class.